Chapter 39. Chapter 34. Sirius does teach her how to ride the motorbike, and it doesn't end as disastrously as they first thought it would, which was good. But then Remus found out that Sirius had let her ride the motorbike, which was decidedly not good. Eliza was sure one of the reasons she hadn't been grounded was because Remus would have had to have grounded Sirius as well, which was just ridiculous. The other reason was, of course, that today was the day of the Malfoy Yule Ball, and if Eliza didn't show up then, Narcissa would go on a warpath. Hell hath no fury like Narcissa Malfoy. It was odd getting ready on her own. Narcissa had invited her around to Malfoy Manor before the ball started, but Eliza intended to arrive at the ball with Sirius. Remus sadly wouldn't be joining them because of the full moon, and Eliza promised to smuggle some chocolate back to him. She had pinned back her hair slightly, and using all the spells Daphne had taught her over the years, started getting ready for the ball. Sirius was great at a lot of things, but ball gowns and makeup was not one of them. Finally, Eliza stepped into her dress and used a spell to zip it up behind her. It was a strapless floor-length ball gown, a deep midnight blue, and was decorated all over by the constellations. Small glimmering crystals sewn into it to create a tapestry of the night sky. The Blacks were famous for their naming patterns, naming their children after the stars of the night sky, and Eliza was ecstatic with Daphne's choice in dress. Sliding Narcissa's hair clip into place and clasping Tom's necklace round her neck, Eliza took one last look at herself in the mirror before nodding. She usually wasn't nervous when it came to balls. In fact, they could be considered the highlight of the year. It gave time for Eliza to build connections while she was still stuck at Hogwarts and establish a place for herself in the world. But she was nervous tonight, because Tom was going to be there. But she wouldn't let it show. She had defeated Dementors and serial killers and Voldemort himself. She could cope with a small, tiny crush. "Pup," Sirius said when she stepped into the foyer, "you look beautiful." Eliza smiled bashfully and linked their arms together. "I suppose you're all right," she joked, and laughed when Sirius let out an offended squawk. "Just for that, I'll let you fall into the flue. But then I'll tell Remus you ate his last bar of Honeydukes chocolate." Eliza. When she came through the flue on the other side, she was still giggling slightly over his scandalized tone. Stepping out smoothly for once, she stayed in the foyer until Narcissa or Lucius came to collect her and Sirius. Thankfully, they weren't waiting very long, and soon the door opened to reveal the two Malfoys. "Cousin Sirius," Narcissa greeted warmly and brought him in for a hug as Eliza smiled at Lucius. "Please don't terrorize my guests." Sirius barked a laugh and grinned wildly. "It's not me you have to worry about." Narcissa turned to face Eliza at that and hugged her as well, which Eliza returned happily. "Eliza, you look absolutely gorgeous," she said, and pulled away with a teasing smile. "Please don't terrorize my guests," she repeated, and Eliza laughed brightly. "Don't worry, Narcissa. I'm on my best behavior. That's what we're afraid of," Lucius chimed in with a grimace, and even Narcissa had to muffle a laugh at his tone. The four of them all started moving out of the foyer and into the main ballroom, and Eliza felt her eyes widen. The ballroom was covered in fairy lights and ice sculptures, opulent and elegant in classic Malfoy style. "This looks amazing," Eliza breathed, and Narcissa smiled, clearly pleased by Eliza's praise. "Thank you, dear, but I think you should go and enjoy it now." Draco's somewhere in the crowd. Eliza smiled and turned to face Sirius, who was looking slightly overwhelmed. "Will you be okay?" Sirius hadn't been out in high society for many years now, not that he ever really enjoyed it in the first place, and Eliza worried about how he would cope with tonight. He smiled down at her and made an aborted move to ruffle her hair, but stopped under the weight of her glare. "Don't worry about me, pup," he said. "Go out there and cause trouble." She heard Lucius let out a sigh that conveyed just how much he disagreed with that sentiment, but did nothing to stop her when she darted into the crowd. It was hard to move about quickly in her ball gown, but Eliza still managed to slip in and out of the crowd with somewhat ease until eventually she came upon her court. They had all gathered in the corner, talking to one another happily. The boys were all wearing traditional wizarding robes, and Daphne was wearing a light pink floor-length dress. Susan stood by her side. "If you stay in this corner the whole night, I'm going to be very disappointed," Eliza commented, easily slipping into the group, who all turned to look at her with a smile. Not all of us come to these things for the politics, Eliza, Blaze said wryly, and Eliza tutted in false disappointment. Exactly, Daphne said, agreeing with Blaze. Some of us come here for the excellent company. She finished, looking at Susan, who rolled her eyes at Daphne when she winked. You can be as sweet as you want. You will never make me dance with you, Susan replied with a shake of her head, and Eliza and her court all shared pitying glances. If Daphne wanted to dance, then there was no way Susan was getting out of it, even if she did have 2 left feet. Well, all of you might be fine with squandering your chances, Eliza said in a false haughty tone, but I'm not. It is a shame the minister isn't here tonight, Theo said, taking a sip of his champagne. It would have been fun watching Eliza tear him to pieces. Multiple murmurs of agreement came from all of them at that. I promised Narcissa I would be on my best behavior. Eliza responded easily and heard Draco murmur a very quiet, "Thank Merlin." She spent half an hour stood with her court, happily chatting with them all, and trying to sneak a glass of wine from unsuspecting waiters before she decided to make her move. Does anyone want to join me as I turn this very civil ball into a war zone, or? Eliza trailed off, grinning mischievously, as they all shook their heads in exasperation and possibly a bit of despair before Theo stepped forward. I wouldn't mind joining you for a round, he said easily, and Eliza smiled happily, linking her arm through his own. I thought we'd start with the Parkinsons. They're over by Lady Abbott right now, and she's been a known advocate in the education sect these past months. Eliza started to explain as they moved around the room. She and Theo spent quite a while making the rounds of the hall, with Eliza providing commentary and Theo shaking his head and trying to hide his small snickers at her bitching. I'm just saying, if Burke could see what was in front of him rather than being blinded by money signs, he would be a bit easier to deal with now, little star. It would do no good to slander a valuable ally. Tom, Eliza exclaimed and whirled around to see Tom leaning against the wall of the room, a glass of wine in his hand. He was wearing something similar to his Yule Ball outfit, a long tailcoat and dark blue waistcoat. His eyes were glamoured to their normal whiskey brown, with flecks of his usual ruby red appearing in the light, and smiled wickedly when she approached. Would it kill him to look a bit less handsome? How was she ever meant to cope with having a crush on him when he turned up looking like that? Eliza could just punch him, or maybe she wanted to do something else. You can't tell me I was wrong, she said in reference to her earlier comment as she neared him. Theo, slipping away into the crowd before they reached the Dark Lord. It's true that he thinks in profit rather than sense, but at least his type are quite easy to appeal to. He countered easily with a small smirk, which only widened when he spotted the necklace she had clasped around her neck. Can I say you look absolutely stunning tonight, darling? He said lowly, and Eliza valiantly fought the urge to blush. Well, you could say that. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to hearing it, she responded teasingly, and felt a flash of satisfaction when his eyes widened minutely. Beauty and modesty, you have it all, don't you, little star? He drawled, and Eliza grinned crookedly in response. Don't forget charming, she added in and watched as Tom's smile grew. I thought that was my job. How can you be my Prince Charming when you've not even asked me to dance yet? Eliza quipped with her heart in her throat. Tom tilted his head slightly as he studied her, but then held out his hand. Well then, would you care to join me? Eliza placed her hand in his, and they joined the other dancers on the floor before the music began again. They didn't speak. They didn't feel the need to. Eliza was content to simply dance with him, losing herself to the music and the movement as they slowly span around the room. It was nice, really. Nice and simple and happy in an understated way she had never experienced before. But just as a second song started again, Tom spoke up. I saw you speaking to the Parkinsons earlier. Eliza nodded and smiled softly when she saw the look on his face. She could understand why her friends always told her she had a scheming face. I had them introduce me to Lady Abbott. She was very interested to hear that despite the Board of Governors' demands that Professor Binns is still teaching, Eliza said innocently, and allowed Tom to spin her before pulling her back into his arms. Already causing chaos, little star? He asked, lips quirking into a grin which Eliza returned. Of course. Are you feeling up to causing more? He questioned, raising an eyebrow, and Eliza smiled mischievously. Do you even have to ask? The dance ended, and Tom bowed formally to her, which Eliza returned with a curtsy until they both split their separate ways. Tom started heading towards a group of light magic sect followers, and Eliza headed for a group of dark sect wizards and pretended to bump into one of them. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," Eliza said with an earnest smile as Lord Flint turned to face her. "I'm afraid I wasn't looking where I was going." "That's fine, Air Potter," Flint said with undisguised curiosity. "Was that Lord Gaunt you were just with?" That grabbed the attention of everyone in the surrounding area, and so pitching her voice just right, Eliza responded, "Oh yes, Tom and I have known each other for quite a long time now. I find we agree on many policies." "Is that so?" Lady Selwyn said, and Eliza smiled brightly, nodding her head. "I've been keeping up with the Wisengamot meetings, you see, as I have 4 house seats waiting for me, and Tom's always willing to debate the current bills with me," she said, easily ignoring the looks they were all sharing. "Oh, really?" Burke said snidely, and Merlin Eliza really hated that guy. "And what about the new proposed bill from the Auras?" Ah, lovely, nice, and vague question to throw her off. Too bad he had no idea who he was dealing with. "The House Joint Bill, Lord Burke, which would allow any Aura to raid any house or ancestral manor without requiring a warrant or any formal permission." He nodded dumbly. "Well, I find the whole thing rather despicable. It's our right as civilians to be allowed to live in peace without the Auras showing up to randomly ransack our houses. Not only that, but there's been a worrying trend in searches on ancestral manors in the past 10 years. Why, even Uncle Lucius and Aunt Cissa had some trouble a few years back," Eliza proclaimed, and smothered a smirk as all the nobles agreed with her vehemently before she leaned in closer. "And just between us, I have to say I've noticed the prejudice amongst the Auras. I understand over the years the minister has outlawed many of our traditions, but now just for treasuring our history, we're being placed under suspicion. Lord Gaunt is adamantly against the bill, and if I were allowed to vote, so would I." Eliza finished strongly and smirked when the group in front of her looked at her admiringly. "I would have thought you would disagree, Air Potter, what with the Potters being a traditionally light-aligned house." One of them said, clearly fishing for Eliza's stance on things. She smiled secretively and started moving away. "The Potters have always been considered traditionalists, as well as being aligned with the light. However, I'm also Air Black, and the Blacks have always been aligned with the dark. I intend to bring the 2 houses back to their former honorable standing befitting their status without betraying their core ideals," she said, and smirked at their slack-jawed faces. "Does that answer your question?" But Eliza didn't stick around to hear their response, and instead disappeared again into the crowd. Tom would be holding a similar conversation with those traditionally light on the other side of the room. Eliza was about to track him down when she spotted a surprise guest standing sullenly against the wall. "Severus," she called, and if she wasn't mistaken, she actually saw him curse under his breath. Grinning, Eliza made her way over to the teacher and came to a stop standing next to him. "I thought you avoided these events. Did Narcissa threaten you again?" The man let out a resigned sigh and took another gulp of his wine. "No, I'm here to raid Lucius' liquor cabinet," he replied. "There's too many students here for me to cope whilst sober." Eliza rose her eyebrows in surprise. She suspected her professor was already far past being considered sober. "You look rather lonely, Professor," Eliza chirped just to see him grimace. "Sirius is in here somewhere. Maybe you could join him." "I'd rather die," Severus responded without missing a beat, and Eliza tried to muffle her laughter. "Now that can easily be arranged." "Ah, yes, I thought I saw the Dark Lord here," he drawled, and Eliza blinked in surprise. "You seem to be handling that quite calmly. I'm on my 6th glass of wine." "Ah, he really didn't like parties, did he?" Eliza was about to stay and annoy her professor a bit more when she heard her name get called out from the crowd. "Eliza!" Someone called out again, and she spun around trying to locate whoever was calling her until she spotted Gemma Fawley in the crowd, smiling at her brightly. "Gemma!" Eliza called back happily and weaved through the crowd until she came to a stop in front of the older girl. "How have you been?" "It's unspeakable folly now," the girl responded with a smug smile, and Eliza congratulated her brightly. "We've been keeping up with your antics, of course. You've almost given us heart attacks, kid," she said, and Eliza grinned sheepishly before frowning. "We? Forgotten about me already, Potter. Roman, Eliza said fondly, and allowed the older boy to hug her shortly. I didn't know you two stayed in touch. We have a club, Roman expanded, coming to stand next to Gemma, interlocking a hand in his, a club full of people who made friends with Eliza Potter and regretted. Eliza blinked. I can't imagine you have that many people in it. You'd be surprised, said another voice, and Eliza frowned in confusion until he came around to start in front of her. Roll. Why do I feel like I'm being ganged up on? That's because you are, he replied instantly, and Eliza smirked faintly in response. I've not caused any trouble yet. Yet, Roman echoed, and Roll shot a glare at the other boy to quiet him. Thomas Gaunt, really? Do you think we're thick? Gemma buted in. Looking into the faces of her three seniors, Eliza knew there was no way she was coming out of this confrontation alive. She only had one option left. Oh, did you hear that? Eliza questioned innocently. I swear I heard someone call my name. Don't you dare, Gemma said, but Eliza was already moving away. I'm afraid I really have to run. Lovely to see you all again. Really, Eliza Potter. But Eliza was already gone. She spent another hour circling the ballroom chatting to the rich and wealthy of the British wizarding world. All in all, she was being quite productive, but eventually she became bored of the constant socializing and slipped outside. Even the gardens of Malfoy Manor had not escaped the decorating spree Narcissa had gone on. The peacocks were thankfully missing, but the entire place had been transformed. Snow was lightly falling around her, dissolving as soon as it hit the floor. Fairy lights were strung precisely in the trees of the courtyard, bathing everything in a faint silver light, and the red roses were dusted slightly with snow. It was all quite beautiful, really. Eliza closed her eyes, breathing in the crisp, fresh air deeply before taking a sip of the wine she had stolen from Sirius. Aren't you a bit too young to be drinking, little star? Tom's voice called out from behind her, and Eliza didn't even flinch. She was used to Tom's random appearances by now. Ah, but I'm 16 now, Eliza said, not taking her eyes off the night sky above them. The constellations matched those stitched on her dress. That's still not the legal age, darling. I didn't think you'd be one to care about that, she responded, and finally turned to look at him. His glamour was still up, and his brown eyes met her own, but if she looked hard enough, she could make out faint glimmers of red beneath the surface. Tom let out a small hum of acknowledgement before he deftly stole the glass from her light grip and took a slow, indulgent sip of it himself. How often are you using that time-turner of yours, then? Well, I have my secret classroom now. Eliza responded easily and wrinkled her nose when a clump of snow fell on it. So I use more to teach and plan the lessons. Tom let out another one of those odd hums before his lips quirked into a small smile. Well, you are a rather brilliant teacher. Eliza felt her cheeks warm slightly, but she covered up her embarrassment with a teasing grin. Oh, yeah. And how would you know? Do you not remember what you told me, little star? He asked curiously, and Eliza felt his burning gaze like it was a physical weight. The Patroness is a complex thing. You told me. A true portrayal of our soul. Tom shifted closer, and Eliza felt herself freeze. She couldn't tell if she wanted to move back or move in closer. But our souls do not begin with happiness, and they do not end with only love, he quoted almost verbatim, an indecipherable emotion in his voice. You thought I could do it, if I really tried. Yes, Eliza breathed, far more softly than she would have liked. I do. Tom's eyes met hers and a beat passed. And then another before expecto patronum. Tom whispered softly, and the typical silver mist of the Patroness poured out from his wand. Eliza had turned to watch the steadily forming Patroness, but Tom had kept his eyes on her. The mist swirled for a few more moments before it finally came together, and a great looming dragon soared across the courtyard with a flap of its giant wings, and Eliza's breath caught in her throat. A dragon favors those of great ambition and passion, Tom murmured lowly as they watched the dragon dart through the trees around them. And although those with a dragon patroness can be temperamental, it often just means they are driven by their goals and fiercely protective over what they consider their own. He finished explaining just as the dragon dispersed into silvery mist with a soundless roar. Merlin. Eliza breathed quietly with a grin as she turned back to face Tom, who wore a curious expression on her face. I did it, he said with a pleased grin, and Eliza could feel his warm breath on her face, could see the snowflakes caught on his eyelashes as he leaned in even closer. "I always said you could," she said back softly. Tom must be thinking about the words she told him down in the chamber, where she told him she had no doubt that he could cast the Patroness. But in her mind, she was thinking about a different conversation and a very separate set of words. "I don't think you can't love." Because Tom had always thought himself incapable of it, hadn't he? But didn't this prove that he was capable of happiness? Of happiness and care and maybe, just maybe even love. And if he was capable of love, then Eliza, he murmured lowly. She felt her breath hitch when she met his dark eyes with her own, and it felt like, for just a moment, that time had stopped with them. "There are some eyes that can devour you, Eliza." She heard Draco shout from behind her, and she and Tom jolted apart suddenly. Eliza knew her cheeks were probably bright red, and she refused to look at Tom in the eyes as she shuffled further away. It wasn't as though she'd never kissed anyone before. She had gotten curious over summer after hearing Daphne ramble on about Susan, and Blaze had been more than happy to be her partner in her small experiment. It hadn't been anything exciting, though, and Eliza really hadn't gotten what all the fuss was about, but perhaps that was because it was Blaze. Tom was not Blaze. "Eliza," Draco called again as he came to a stop in front of them, and Eliza pretended not to notice the death glare Tom was sending Draco. "Sirius has been trying to find you. He said he and Severus have almost got into a duel, so if you don't want Narcissa to castrate him, you'll have to leave now." How oddly specific, and yet ridiculously, infuriatingly believable. Eliza said, "I suppose I best be going." By Merlin, this was so awkward. She could feel Tom's gaze still steadily locked on her, and she honestly wanted nothing more than to crawl in a hole and die. She couldn't believe she had almost kissed Tom. Tom! How was she ever meant to look at him in the eyes ever again? Oh, Salazar, he still hadn't said anything. She should say goodbye. She should say goodbye, right? "Send me a message when you next want to meet up," Eliza said towards Tom, and resisted the urge to shuffle nervously when an almost predatory grin spread across his face. "Of course, little star," he agreed easily before slipping into parcel tongue. "Perhaps we can pick up where we left off." Eliza let out an honest to Merlin squeak and turned on her heel, following Draco back into the manor. Tom fucking Riddle. He'd be the death of her. When Remus returned to Grimmauld Place, Eliza does give him some Honeydukes chocolate as promised. A few days later, they have a small and modest but intimate Yule celebration with just the three of them, and Eliza fell asleep surrounded by her family magic. She adamantly didn't think about her near kiss, nor Tom's reaction to it. Tom has always been a flirt. He enjoyed it. He enjoyed flustering her and teasing people. He knew how to play people like fiddles, and he relished in it. Every comment had a motive, every word just another weapon, even in normal conversation. He couldn't feel the same things for her that she did for him, and that was fine. Eliza had never expected him to. She just wished he were an easier person to have a crush on. Although, thankfully, he did grace her with a few days apart before he called her over for their first mission. It's the 27th of December, and she was about to break into Azkaban prison. "Hello, darling," Tom greeted when her portkey landed her next to him on the mainland. Azkaban was sat across the sea on the island. Even in the darkness, it cut an imposing figure against the skyline. A large, foreboding, crumbling mass sat amongst jagged rocks, and Eliza knew she was not imagining the melancholy that seemed to infect even the roiling sea around them. Tom was wearing full battle robes next to her, the leather hugging his skin in a way that was sinful, and if they weren't about to pull of the biggest heist in wizarding history, Eliza would have probably spent more time admiring the view. But as it were, "So how are we planning on doing this? Should I maintain a patroness whilst you cast?" Eliza asked, curiously clutching her spare wand. She craved for her vine-wood one, but the second-hand black one would simply have to do. They couldn't risk the trace activating here. Eliza was still waiting for Tom's response, and she turned to face at him when all she was met with was silence. He was looking down at her with a smug sort of smile, red eyes glinting dangerously in the dark. "I secured an alliance with the Dementors months ago. There are always only ever 10 auras on site, 2 to each floor. Because of the Dementors, they grew complacent with staffing," Tom explained easily, and now Eliza could fully understand why that stupid smug smile was on his face. My followers are all being held on the bottom 2 floors. That's where we're heading. What are we doing about the auras? Eliza asked, shifting slightly, so Tom could apparate them both across the island. Their trespass would alert the wards, but they planned to be long gone by that time. Tom had 2 of his Death Eaters working on dismantling most of the wards of the island as they spoke. All the wards would be down by midnight, allowing even wizards with the weakest cores to apparate away. Incapacitate but not kill. And what about when the Order members show up? Eliza questioned, as they both took in the imposing sight of Azkaban before them. Tom looked down at her with a crooked grin and blazing eyes. Have fun. Eliza snickered slightly, but adjusted her grip on her wand accordingly. Sensing it was time, she also pulled down the mask that was resting atop her head. Shaped like a fox and glinting gold in the moonlight, it would mask her identity in front of the others. And how are we breaking in? We're not going to break in, Tom replied airily, and then span on the spot. Eliza felt her lungs constrict painfully before they both landed on Azkaban Island with a jolt, feet hitting the rocks heavily. We're going to walk straight through the front doors, and that's exactly what they did. Eliza and Tom strode straight through the front doors of Azkaban. Tom made quick work of the 2 guards stood by the door, and even though the building was apparently empty of Dementors, their effects still lingered. Misery permeated the damp, crumbling walls, and Eliza bristled uncomfortably as they made their way down and down and down. The twisting steps were slippery, and even through her battle robes, Eliza could feel the cold. Sirius had been in this dump for 12 years. Eliza wanted to burn it to the ground. Eventually, they came to the last 2 sets of stairs, shining wetly in the dim light of their Lumos charms. I'll take the high-security prisoners. You take the others, Tom commanded, easily slipping back into his role as leader. It had been easy to forget at Hogwarts with the teasing banter and airy comments, but Tom was very much a commander, a man bred for war. And here, he was in his element. Eliza nodded shortly in response and started the lonely trek down the left-hand stairs. She sort of wished they could have brought more of Tom's followers, but they had both agreed things would have less chance of going wrong if it were just the 2 of them. She still wished she had someone with her, though, in this suffocating gloom. She would have brought Barty, but Eliza didn't want him anywhere near this place ever again. Soon, but not soon enough, Eliza arrived at her set of cells. She could hear the faint groans and whimpers of the prisoners, the rattling of chains, and barely working lungs. There were some on this floor that Eliza could leave behind, murderers and rapists that she had no qualms with leaving to rot. But Tom's Death Eaters were lords to noble families, and if they had killed, it had never been wizard blood that was spilt. It did not mean they were good people, but it made them useful. They would serve on the front lines when the time came, now that their standing was ruined. And she knew Tom couldn't just leave them in Azkaban, and that was good enough. But before she could stage their great escape, she would need the keys to the cells, which would undoubtedly be held by the you there. An aura yelled from down the corridor, which was honestly quite sloppy of him. Eliza hit him with a stupefy, and was already moving towards him before his body hit the ground. Eliza didn't worry about her identity being discovered with her mask. The gold gilded one melded into the shape of a fox, a symbol of cunning, mischief, and mayhem, all of which she was enacting tonight. Eliza smiled to herself when she finally found a large ring full of keys in the aura's pocket. There weren't even any jinxes on them. The Dementors really must have made them all grow complacent. With keys in hand, Eliza set off down the corridor, doing her best to ignore the cold that was seeping into her bones. She unlocked prison doors as she moved down the rows. Avery, Roll, and Rosier, until she came upon Nut's cell. Eliza unlocked that cell too, and then she slipped inside. She didn't have a lot of time to waste. There were 2 more Death Eaters on this floor she had to secure, and then she would have to feed pepper-up potions to those Death Eaters who were still too weak to move. But she had enough time for this. Eliza leveled her wand at the pitiful man. He was awake, but only barely and nowhere near as lucid as she would have wanted him to be, but it would do. This, Eliza began calmly, and heard her voice bounce off the cold, harsh stone of the prison, is for my brother in all but blood. Eliza leveled her wand at the decrepit form and cast her spell. The poison the man had given his wife had been a fast-acting one, and due to the circumstances, Eliza had to grant him the same mercy. The man choked and writhed on the ground, blood spilling out of his mouth as he tried to scream. As she was watching, she knew that inside his lungs had begun to shrivel and burn away. She didn't stay to watch him die. Eliza made quick work of rounding up the Azkaban escapees. They were all still rather out of it, but they were all more than willing to follow her and their lord's escape plan. Eliza was leading the group up the stairwell when she found Tom with his own sorry band of Azkaban convicts. "Have you alerted Severus?" Eliza asked, and had to squash down a flinch when she finally saw Tom in the dim lighting. His normal looks were gone, replaced by the ghastly skeletal frame of the old Voldemort, complete with the slitted nostrils and dark burgundy eyes. "Yes," Tom responded, and even his voice had changed into that chilling, high-pitched tone that still sometimes haunted her nightmares. "We shall drop my Death Eaters off at the Portkey Point. The wards for this whole place will fall in just less than 10 minutes at midnight. Until then, we take out as many Order members as we can." Eliza nodded seriously in response, but couldn't deny the adrenaline that was coursing through her veins, the ever-present itch for a good fight rising to the surface as they neared the doors of Azkaban. They had stunned a further 3 Aurors by the time they made it out of the prison. The escapees behind her stumbled as they stepped out the doors. This would be the first time they would be seeing the sky in almost 13 years, first time smelling the sharp sea breeze instead of musty, mouldy walls. But they had no time to squander. With clear instructions, Eliza and Tom left the group of 16 Death Eaters by the portkeys that would activate in less than 10 minutes that would take them to Riddle Manor, their acting safe house. Eliza and Tom returned to the entrance of Azkaban and waited. "Are you ready, darling?" Tom murmured as they heard the telltale cracks of apparition from the foot of the rocky bay. "More than," Eliza replied with a vicious grin as she counted the Order members that had appeared on the island, 10 in total. Sadly, not that much of a fight. Tom shifted forward slightly, and Eliza had to dampen down the urge to move with him. She was so used to being his partner, his equal, that it was odd to stand behind him instead. But they had both agreed it would be suspicious for an unknown masked Death Eater to appear as Voldemort's equal. Even Bellatrix had never gained the honor of standing beside the Dark Lord, and she was considered his right hand in many ways. "I don't recall inviting you to the party," Tom called, and even in the odd hoarse voice of the glamour Eliza could still hear his own lilting tone under the sibilant hiss of his words. None of the Order members said anything in response to that, not that Eliza expected them to. Sirius was the only one among them who would have dared to backchat Lord Voldemort himself. Once it became evident that none of the Order would be making the first move, Tom shot a mild cutting hex into the crowd of vigilantes. That was all it took for the duel to begin. Eliza span and danced around the multiple stunners that came her way and started firing her own, albeit nastier, jinxes into the crowd of Order members. She heard one of them shout to call for Dumbledore, and she managed to hit him with a bone-breaking hex to the spine before she had to return to her own duel. Tom was handling 5 of them at once, just a little way away, and Eliza found herself surrounded by 3 others. Eliza threw up a Protego in just enough time to block an unfriendly bone-breaking curse that had her smiling viciously. "Oh, now, that wasn't very nice," she simpered, the mask distorting her voice so they wouldn't recognize her. "But I suppose, if we're not fighting fair." She allowed herself to trail off, and then faster than they could hope to keep up with Eliza, shot a Bombarda Maxima at their feet. The rocky bay exploded, and the 3 Order members stumbled back to avoid the sharp pieces of rock flying towards them. Eliza took their moment of distraction and fired off a volley of curses until only one of them was left standing. "You bitch," the woman cursed, and Eliza grinned nastily at her. "Just who are you?" "You can call me Eris," Eliza replied, and danced out of the way of another stunner. The goddess of mischief and mayhem, she and Tom had thought it was fitting. Eliza traded some more spells with the woman, but quickly tired of the repetitive nature of the fight. It was an easy duel, and Eliza felt disappointment unfurl in her. She had wanted a challenge, but the Order truly was pitiful. Eliza levitated the shards of rock around them from her earlier bombarder and sent them towards the woman in a volley. She did not care if the woman wouldn't ever stand back up. Tom had easily dealt with the 5 Order members that had surrounded him, and from the dark puddles that surrounded some of them, Eliza knew that it couldn't have been pretty. Judging by the easy smirk on Tom's face, as he faced the last order member standing, Eliza knew that he too had found the fight disappointingly easy. "And here, I thought you were calling for your leader. Where's your hero now?" Tom taunted softly as he curled his hand around the order member's throat. Eliza shook her head at his dramatics and scanned the area. She had taken out 4, and Tom had dealt with the other 5. The one he was holding now was the last, but Eliza swore she had counted 10. Looking around, Eliza smirked when she saw someone trying to sneak up on Tom. The body Tom was holding was unceremoniously dropped on the floor, but by the time Tom had turned around, Eliza was already casting at the last order member. The man opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, out of his open mouth dropped his own bloody tongue, and it fell onto the rocky floor. The man stumbled back, horrified at the grotesque sight, and Tom waved his wand, lazily making the man drop to his knees with a heavy thud. 10 minutes into their fight, and all the order members had been dispatched in some way or another. The only sound between them was the waves crashing against the rocks. The portkey would have activated by now, delivering all of Tom's Death Eaters back to his manor. It was then they heard the telltale cracks of apparition as backup finally arrived. The wards going down would have alerted the Aura office back in the ministry. They wouldn't know she and Tom were here yet, but it would only be a matter of time before they saw them. Tom didn't give them the chance. Eliza watched as he breathed in deeply to center himself before he raised his wand and cast Fiendfire. A great dragon swooped from his wand, a roaring bright inferno boring down on the newly arrived auras. The dragon coasted by the sea and left flames on the water itself in its wake. The auras screamed and yelled in the face of the Fiendfire, and she and Tom watched as they all apparated away. No one would dare stay in the face of that. Eventually, she realized all the auras must have either left or must have been killed, because the dragon dispersed into embers and smoke. She and Tom stood in silence for a few moments, listening to the crashing waves together. "Shall I drop you off at home, darling?" Tom asked, dropping his glamour and brushing some ash off his battle robes, and Eliza quirked a half-smile in his direction. "The whole gentleman act is a bit incongruous, don't you think?" she asked, and when Tom arched an eyebrow in question, Eliza gestured towards the bodies that littered the ground around them. "Murder is never an excuse to drop all basic courtesy, darling," he quipped, and Eliza laughed lightly. Slipping her arm into Tom's, she steadfastly ignored the goosebumps that rose when her hand brushed against his own. "Well, in that case, I suppose you can take me home." Tom smirked softly one more time as he took in the carnage around them before they apparated way. Neither of them mentioned their almost kiss the whole time they were together, which was fine, really. But when Tom dropped her off on her doorstep with a crooked grin and ruby eyes, Eliza knew that one way or another she was absolutely done for. She was almost back in her room when she heard Sirius' voice call out behind her. "It's past curfew," he said, in mock disapproval. "I don't have a curfew." She tossed carelessly over her shoulder, wanting nothing more than to climb into her warm bed. "You do now," he countered impishly, and Eliza wondered if being a little shit was hardwired into the Black's genes. "Where have you been?" "Breaking into Azkaban," Eliza replied without missing a beat, and Sirius chuckled. When Eliza didn't say anything else, however, his laughter stopped, and Eliza could just imagine his shocked face. "Wait, really?" "I'm going to turn in," Eliza said airily with muffled laughter. "Long night and all that." "Wait, Eliza," he yelped. Eliza's laughter could be heard even when she shut her bedroom door.